Okay, so I'm going to be speaking about restaking alignment. And really what I want to try and do is try and flesh out some of the incentive distortions that restaking bring to the table and try and understand the risks and also some of the mitigations. So I want to start with this analogy because I think restaking changes the fundamentals of the system. So just like AI changes the fundamentals of human intelligence and could really bring us to the next level, AI is also a systemic risk for humanity. We could all die from AI. And I think it's the same thing with restaking. We could see amazing new applications, but we could also kill Ethereum. So I'm going to be a little bit like Eliza today in highlighting some of these risks. In terms of who we should be focusing on in terms of alignment, I think it's okay to not focus too much on the devs and the users, right? Devs will get superpowers, they can build new applications like oracles and pre-confirmers and all sorts of cool things. And the users will be able to enjoy, at least in the short and medium term, from these new applications. But I guess the question is, at what cost? And it's possible that in particular, operators and stakers will suffer, or at least the decentralization of operators will suffer. And maybe even something bigger, something like the credible neutrality of Ethereum itself could suffer. And if you want to take a really long-term horizon, then that might actually be net negative for users and app developers because it's corrupting the foundations and then the whole thing could come crumbling. So in the first part, I'm going to focus on some of the risks, and I'm going to try and give you a mental framework for thinking about the risks, and then I'll try and highlight some of the opportunities we have for alignment or realignment. So we have new incentives with restaking, and basically we have new rewards and new penalties. And the way that I think about it is that the new rewards are a little bit like generalized MEV, right? Just like MEV is a set of rewards for the stakers that are not native to the L1. Now we have these restaking rewards. And as a researcher, we've spent years trying to make sure that MEV doesn't have all sorts of negative externalities around front running, around censorship, around centralization. And finally, today, I feel very confident that we have MEV under control and the tools to, quote, align it. But now, as a researcher, we've reopened a whole new can of issues with this restaking MEV or generalized MEV. And then one thing which is very unique to restaking is that now we're opening up the can on the penalty side of things, because in addition to the enshrined layer 1 slashing conditions, double vote and surround vote, now stakers can opt into arbitrary slashing conditions, which is maybe even more scary than the generalized MEV aspect. And so like the mental framework that I have is that for each type of incentive distortion, I guess you could label them differently. One is chronic in the sense that it's kind of this small, slow change of the incentives that kind of maybe compound over years and that change the fundamentals from within. And then you have these like massive acute distortions, like there's been a mass slashing event and that really hits you, you lose a limit all in one go. And then I want to try and flesh these two directions out a little bit. So on the chronic distortion side of things, just to recap, we basically now have these small rewards that are potentially unequal for every single staker. So today we have this notion of fairness, whereby if you bring forward 1 ETH of stake, everyone gets the same APR for this 1 ETH of stake. Whereas now with restaking, there's potentially going to be different rewards depending on which restaking application you choose to restake with. And I guess one of the key things here is that it's unequal. And so these inequalities, it's a little bit like a straight line, like two lines which are not perfectly parallel. Like the ones are, like this, and so over time they start diverging. And it's a slow, continuous, insidious process, and it kind of affects the operators, the fairness of operating and staking, and it kind of erodes the decentralization potentially of the operator set, because whoever is not able to access this APR, the competitive APR is kind of forced to come out. And like the mental model that I have for this economic forcing that happens over time is the cost of money. So there's an opportunity cost to holding ETH. I don't know exactly what it is, but let's say 3%, meaning that if you were to go on DeFi, for example, you could earn 3% on your ETH, or you might choose to stake and earn 3% there. But now with restaking, different entities will have access to different amount of stakes. So if you're a staker and your APR is greater than the cost of money, that's all good, no problem. But what happens if now you're a staker and you're earning less than the cost of money? Let's say you're only earning 2% yield. Well, you basically have two options. Option number one is say, okay, screw staking, it's not for me. I could be better off if I were to take my ETH and put it in DeFi. So you kind of arbitrage out the APR between staking and DeFi or some other source of APR that will compensate you for the opportunity cost of money. Or option number two is that you say, I'm going to play this restaking game, and it's kind of rigged against me, and so I'll do things like leverage, and I'll enter this new rat race almost. You're kind of forced to take action. You can't be like chill at home, like, bro, I just want to be a staking validator, just leave me alone. Now you need to think about like 20 different restaking services. Now, you could say, isn't this a solved problem? Like, if you delegate as a staker, you delegate to an operator that has access to the best-in-class yield, then now suddenly you have this fair APR. And that is true. Delegation does solve the APR problem. But it comes with another problem. It creates a new problem, which is around slashing. Because now you need to trust a counterparty, which is basically whoever you've delegated your ETH to not slash you. And so in a way, what you've done is that you've traded off chronic distortion risk for acute distortion risk. It's a little bit like being an insurance provider. You're selling an insurance product. Every month you receive some sort of premium, but then the car accident happens, and now your APR is like negative 100%. You got fully slashed. And so this is in my opinion, not a solution at all. It's just shifting the problem somewhere else. Now, on the topic of acute distortions that could happen if there's large amounts of delegation, basically what is an acute distortion is when there's this large unexpected penalty that kind of affects the set of stakers. And it's kind of this one-time sudden dramatic thing, and what it compromises is social impartiality. And the reason is that, let's say 10 million ETH just suddenly get slashed. What will happen most likely is that those that are affected will invoke the social layer and say, please bail me out. And the fact that the social layer is kind of put in this really awkward position, where it's almost like a lose-lose situation, very much similar to the DAO. Either we hard fork and bail you out, and now we've compromised our credible neutrality, or we don't, and now it's potentially a systemic risk to Ethereum, or there's millions of people that are a victim of this loss. And basically, one way to look at it is, you fuck around, find out, and then the final step is bailout. I just ask for a bailout. And so there's these two forcing functions, right? There's one which is very slow and kind of insidious, and then one which is very, very big, which affects the social layer. Okay, now I want to try and give you a checklist, something more concrete to work on in terms of trying to identify potential restaking applications which are potentially dangerous. And I want to start with the chronic risks. So one of the really big ones is around computational gating. So some restaking applications, in order to be an operator for that restaking application, you're going to need a lot of computational resources, which is very different to the status quo with restaking today. So today, you can stake on a Raspberry Pi. even soon you might be able to stake on your smart watch because the whole the whole EVM will be snarkified. You need you can use a home internet connection, blah 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 blah. But there's going to be some restaking applications out there that decide to compromise on some of this accessibility, and you might need a 1 gigabit internet connection, or you might need 50 milliseconds of latency, and so that's going to constrain, for example, who's able to be an operator for these restaking applications, and it might also constrain like where they are geographically. And one of the end games that's like undesirable is that basically we end up with Solana style operation, yeah, that would be, in my opinion, a bad outcome. So you see, restaking potentially changes the nature of the foundations of Ethereum security. Now, other forms of gating, which are non-computational, are maybe even worse than computational gating. So some of them are around finances, right? Today, in order to be an ETH validator, you need 32 ETH. And that's already like a huge barrier to entry. It's already a huge amount of money. The good news here is that we also have pooling in the sense that with secret shared validators and distributed validator technology, we can split up a single logical validator and have the stake come from multiple entities. But in the future, with restaking applications, it's quite possible, if not quite likely, that some of them will require massive amounts of stake in order to even participate as an operator. And I think one of the reasons is technical. Like a lot of consensus mechanisms, BFT mechanisms, only allow for a small set of validators, maybe 100 validators. Now the thing is, we have 28 million ETH staked on Ethereum layer 1, and if you want to support 100 validators, then basically that's 1% of all the stake. That's 280,000 ETH per validator. So we're going potentially from 32 ETH that can be pooled from multiple people to a restaking application where you need 100,000 or more ETH to play the game. And then there might be restaking applications that are KYC'd and permissioned, or there might be restaking applications which have a very high burden of maintenance. You might need to hire a DevOps team in order to be competitive, and all the home stakers just won't be able to compete without delegation, which again, delegation is not a solution in my opinion. And so here the outcome is that basically the operator set becomes like Citadel and Banks and TradFi. So again, we're potentially changing the nature of Ethereum security, and it kind of becomes TradFi, which would be a really bad outcome. Now, in terms of the checklist for acute distortions, like these acute distortions stem from lack of security, right? If you have mass slashing, like something went really, really wrong. There might be a bug, or it might be a design issue, or whatever it is. And the way that we've approached staking is we've been extremely conservative. Like we have this huge client diversity, 5 clients written in different languages from different teams. We have very heavy audits. We're extremely slow, right? We took many years to deploy proof of stake. We have a deterministic state transition function. Like we have all these things which make staking like really robust and secure. But with restaking, the incentives are such that you want to be a first mover. You want to deploy as soon as possible. You want to minimize your cost. And so there's going to be some sacrifices made, I'm assuming, on security. So there might only be one implementation. There might be like very little auditing happening. You might be using a non-deterministic state transition function. And that's actually quite scary for a bit of a technical reason, whereby in order to achieve consensus on non-determinism, the best that I know of is basically to use an honest majority assumption. So if you want to do an oracle, which is non-deterministic kind of subjective data, the best you can do is to have an honest majority assumption. But the problem with honest majority assumptions is that if a 51% attack happens, that 51% attacker can slash all the honest people. So it's kind of the worst kind of attack that you could have. And just like we have hacks, almost every week in DeFi within smart contracts, now we have these restaking applications. And my prediction is that we're going to see restaking hacks happen routinely as well. And the worrying thing is that, like the user base is huge, and the amount of collateral, stake is massive, and so that's going to potentially force the social layer to make decisions around bailouts or no bailouts. And Vitalik talks about, not encroaching or overloading the social layer. And basically, like his policy is like no bailouts, but ultimately it's not up to him to decide. It's going to be up to the community. And if 10 million ETH does get slashed, it's going to be an interesting development. Okay, so what are some of the potential solutions and opportunities? Well, one thing that is very, very low-hanging fruit is that we just need to do more research. I think almost all the research has happened at the application development level. Right? We have all these entrepreneurs, like many of you in this room, presumably, that are just building these cool new services, but there's almost no effort that's put on the research side of things. So I'm hopeful that anyone who's building a restaking application, and that includes EigenLayer, that they have an in-house team that's dedicated to alignment research. And I think the position is open for a chief alignment officer, so please send applications to EigenLayer. In terms of like technical solutions, one like very natural one is to try and solve the computational thing. So on Ethereum layer 1, we have this computational problem where in order to build MEV, efficient and optimal blocks, we need these powerful builders. And we've managed to very cleanly segregate the centralization of the builders from the decentralization of the validators with something called proposer-builder separation. And we can do the same thing with restaking, at least in theory. So we can have restaking builders that are very, very powerful, restaking proposers that are a laptop or Raspberry Pi. And like the key property that needs to happen for this design to be possible is for the restaking proposer to make sure that they won't get slashed just by seeing a restaking block from the builder. So the builders, what they'll do is that they'll send little headers without sending the block. That means that the proposer can't steal their block. And then the proposer is asked to sign off. So all the signing keys are fully custodial. You're not delegating anything. But the important property is that you can check that you won't get slashed just by looking at the header. And you can do this without a relay, but in the short term, the most practical way forward is just to use a relay, just like we have MEV boost relays at layer 1. Now, in terms of the APR, I might have like painted a very gloomy picture, right? Like, it seems like there's these forces that push towards Ethereum becoming more like Solana or more like TradFi. But there's actually hope. And actually there's a lot of, I remain optimistic that we can take this other path where for some reason the retail APR that you can make as a restaker, as a home restaker, is going to be greater than the institutional APR. My screen's gone dark. Can't see my next slide. And basically the reason is that you can try and hope that there's retail applications that have a greater APR than institutions. Now, let me explain how that's possible. One is that we can try and be especially friendly to retail. So we can try and give grants, for example, to restaking applications that are dedicated to retail. Another thing which I think is extremely powerful, and I'm kind of shocked that no one has done it yet, is airdrops. So imagine that you're, I don't know, Scroll or ZK Sync or Starknet. Like you're doing your airdrop. Like, who are the most aligned people within the Ethereum that you can give your airdrop to? It's like home stakers who have been there since Genesis. And the amazing thing here is that if you know there's a $10,000 airdrop, let's say, to these stakers, now the APR of validating from home is going to be like 20, 25, 30%, much larger than institutional APR. So I think there's an opportunity there to have very high retail APR. I also think EigenLayer can be activist with its veto committee. So for example, we could have a policy that any restaking application which is protected by the veto committee has to be retail friendly, at least in the first, let's say, 18 months, so that we give a chance for retail friendly restaking to take precedence over institutional friendly initiatives. But there's this other concept which I call institutional repellent. It's a little bit like mosquito repellent. You just spray it on your body, and then institutions don't like it. And here's kind of like a bit of a recipe or a menu for building restaking applications that are not friendly to institutions. So one of them is to build some sort of dog token or meme coin that's secured by EigenLayer. And think about it. Like will like BlackRock, with all the ETH that's being kept in their ETF, are they going to restake woof restaking coin? Like probably not, right? There'll be a reputational risk. Same thing with privacy chains, right? Is BlackRock going to restake some sort of privacy chain that's kind of mixing funds? Or Ponzi schemes, it's kind of this weird thing where Ponzi schemes could actually save Ethereum. Because of compliance risk, like BlackRock's just not going to touch it. And there's also like techniques like proof of location or proof of humanity, where you might be able to identify these solo stakers and give them an NFT in kind of one NFT, one vote kind of voting power, and therefore the APR that you make as a solo operator is much higher than one of an institution which has many validators. Okay, I think this is one of my last slides, which is another piece of super awesome technology which could help in the long term. So one-shot signatures is a signature scheme where when you have a private key, and when you sign even a single message, the private key disappears. It goes poof. And you think, okay, how is this even possible to build? It turns out you can build it with quantum mechanics. So once we have like quantum computers, basically, you can have a private key, which is a quantum object. In order to sign a message, you need to observe the key that destroys the key, and now you can't sign a second message. And because of the no-cloning theorem, then you have this security property. The reason why I mentioned this is because a large part of EigenLayer like slashing conditions are around deterministic safety. And with one-shot signatures, you can use pure cryptography to solve deterministic safety. So for example, the no double vote slashing condition at Ethereum layer 1 can go away. The no surround vote at Ethereum layer 1 can go away. And like a lot of slashing conditions which make restaking dangerous can just go away. And so even if, let's say, the next 10 years are just really bad, where restaking brings Ethereum in a bad direction, I think quantum computers kind of, maybe surprisingly, give us a hope that we can go back to a more sustainable equilibrium, because we won't need restaking to such an extent, because we can replace restaking with pure technology. And that's it. Thank you. I think there's a panel next, and they're going to set up the chairs. So I guess we have time for questions while they set up the chairs. Mike? I'll repeat the question.
So it looks like in the it looks like the eigenlayer centralizes the number of validators in Ethereum because of this centralizing force. As an offshoot of that, do we also get single source finality and we don't have to like research all of this work now?
Okay, so I'm trying to thread the needle between centralization and single source finality. I'm assuming that because it's so centralized, we have so few validators that single source finality is easy to do. I don't think that's necessary, because the way that we think about single source finality is in terms of worst case, right? We assume the worst case where we have the most amount of validators. So we'll always be designing for that. It's possible that in practice, things will be much more centralized. But I don't want to give up on centralization just yet, or on decentralization. I still think there is a potential outcome out there where the retail yield is actually greater than the institutional yield, and we have a very healthy and decentralized set of operators.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I know that people, especially like the EF, has talked about Lido being dangerous once it's above 20% or 33%. Is it the same percentage for eigenlayer or different? And what would be sort of solutions if it blows past that?
Right. So what I've talked about is actually only the restaking applications, right? If there's some sort of mass slashing or unfair APR for stakers. I haven't talked about the risks of the platform itself. And I have a little extra slide, I think, here, which answers your question. Basically, there's additional risk that comes from the platform itself. And it's very similar to Lido. And I actually put the logo there. And it's the same kind of risks, right? There's going to be contract risk. There's going to be governance risk. And there's also going to be, I guess you can call monopoly risks, right? The fact that now, from a social standpoint, there's going to be, one team that's going to have a lot of say, a lot of influence over the social layer. And also there's mimetic risk, right? Even though Lido itself is like pretty well distributed, people think of Lido as one single brand, and in terms of perceived decentralization, it's like really, really bad. And so it is a possible outcome that eigenlayer is so successful that people say, Ethereum is centralized just because eigenlayer is so successful. Whereas if you look one level deeper, it will be very decentralized at the restaking application. But you're right, fundamentally there will be centralization in terms of contract risk, and maybe also in terms of governance risk if they introduce a token with governance. Yeah.
Is that true for like any application that maybe like has a lot of money stacked in it, not just like the restaking application?
Yes, it's true for all applications, except that LSTs and restaking specifically are very, very close to the consensus layer. And so...
Yeah, that is true, but there is again a social need for an application that could get hacked, something like the DAO hack, right? Which caused their fault, right?
Yeah, for sure. But like, for example, if you look at the mimetic risk here, it's hard to argue that Ethereum staking or security is very centralized because Uniswap is so successful, right? There's a clear delineation there. But if 90% of all Ethereum validators have eigenlayer contracts as their withdrawal contracts, that's a bit more difficult to argue against, even though it's still not decentralized. But mimetically, in terms of perceived centralization, it's still there.